The storm cloud rolled in from the northwest, like a bruise spreading across clean skin, turning the golden wheat prairie the color of old iron. Dakota urged his black horse down the rutted path, toward Ember Ridge the eagle feather, in his worn buckskin band, catching the last slant of amber light. He'd ridden 3 days to collect what was owed 3 good horses the price agreed upon last winter, when Finn Hale's family had been starving, and Dakota had provided elk meat and buffalo hides. Spring had come and gone. The debt was due. The shack appeared ahead, sagging on its fieldstone foundation, like a wounded animal trying to rise. Dakota's jaw tightened. The place looked worse than he remembered, fence rails missing the vegetable patch trampled to dust, and something white flapping against the door. A notice. He dismounted slowly, eyes scanning the yard. No horses, no wagon. Just a rusty bucket overturned beside a well with a padlock gleaming new and cold on its cover. Movement in the doorway made him turn. A woman stepped out barefoot, her cotton dress torn at the shoulder and stained with what looked like flour paste and dried milk. She held an infant on her hip, the child fussing weakly, and behind her came 5 other children in a staggered line, ages ranging from a girl barely taller than the doorframe down to a boy who could not have been more than 2. They were all thin. Dust smudged their cheeks. Their eyes were too large. The woman met his gaze without flinching, though her free hand trembled against the baby's back. "Wrong place to come calling, mister." Dakota said nothing for a moment, reading the exhaustion in her stance, the way her bare feet were planted wide to keep her balance. He glanced past her to the notice on the door, close enough now to read the word seizure in bold black ink. "Where is Finn Hale?" "Dead." Her voice was steady, but barely. 3 months now. Mining collapse at Dead Man's Gulch. The baby began to wail, a thin, hungry sound. One of the older boys, maybe 10, stepped forward protectively, fists clenched despite his size. Dakota respected that. He looked back at the woman and saw the truth in her hollow cheeks. Finn Hale had promised 3 horses. Finn Hale was gone, and this widow had nothing. A sound drifted up the road. Hoofbeats harnessed jingled, the metallic click of rifles being checked. Dakota turned his head slowly. 6 riders approached in a loose formation, dust rising behind them like smoke. The lead man wore a tin star that caught the dying sunlight. Another, mounted on a gray horse and dressed in a wool coat too fine for the heat, carried a leather satchel. The rest were hard-faced men with gun belts and the look of men paid to hurt people. The woman Charlotte, he assumed, shifted the baby higher and said quietly, "They've been coming every few days, telling me to leave." Dakota studied the riders, then looked back at her. Her eyes were green, he noticed, clear and sharp despite the fear. She wasn't begging. She was warning him to ride away while he could. Instead, Dakota stepped sideways, placing himself between her and the approaching posse. His hand rested lightly on the knife sheathed at his belt. The wind picked up, stirring the dry grass and making the seizure notice snap like a flag. The riders slowed as they entered the yard, fanning out in a half circle. The man with the star, Sheriff Orville Pike, if the rumors were true, leaned forward in his saddle eyes, flicking from Dakota to Charlotte and back again. "Didn't know you had company, Mrs. Hale?" Charlotte's voice came from behind Dakota's shoulder, tight and brittle. "Didn't know I needed permission for visitors on my own land." "Not your land much longer," the man in the wool coat said smoothly. Dakota recognized the type of banker maybe, or land speculator. Someone who traded in paper and misery, unless you found a way to settle your late husband's debts. The baby's crying grew louder. One of the younger children started to sob. Dakota did not move. He watched Pike's hand drift toward the shotgun resting across his saddle horn. Pike smiled without warmth. "You've got until sundown tomorrow, Mrs. Hale. Then we come back with a court order and a wagon. You and those children best be gone by then." His gaze shifted to Dakota, cold and measuring. "And whoever your friend is, he'd best move along too. We don't take kindly to trouble around here." Dakota met his stare and said nothing. His silence was answer enough. The riders turned their horses and left at a slow walk, deliberate and unhurried. They did not need to rush. They held all the cards. Dakota waited until they were out of earshot before turning to face Charlotte Hale. She was still standing still, holding the baby, but her shoulders had begun to shake. The older boy moved closer to her side. The other children clustered around her skirt like frightened birds. "I came for horses," Dakota said quietly. "Finn promised 3. Charlotte nodded slowly, blinking hard. "I know, he told me. But there's nothing left to give you. They took the horses 2 weeks ago. Said Finn owed the bank. Said there was a promissory note. Was there? Finn never signed anything except the freight contracts." Her voice broke for just a moment, then steadied. "The signature on that note isn't his. I'd know his hand anywhere." Dakota looked at the padlocked well, the trampled garden, the children's bare feet. He thought of the 3 horses he was owed, and the winter his people had coming. He thought about walking away, cutting his losses, finding the debt elsewhere. It would be the practical choice, the smart choice. Then he looked back at Charlotte Hale, this young widow with 6 children and no water and a seizure notice on her door, and made a decision that would cost him more than horses ever could. "I'll stay," he said, "until this is settled." Charlotte stared at him, confusion and hope warring in her expression. "Why?" Dakota turned toward the darkening road where the riders had disappeared. "Because they'll be back, and you can't stand alone." The wind rose, carrying the first cold drops of rain. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The baby finally quieted, exhausted. And for the first time in 3 months, Charlotte Hale allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone was on her side. The storm never broke that night, just circled overhead like a vulture and moved on by dawn. Dakota slept outside near his horse rifle, across his knees, waking at every sound. Charlotte and the children remained inside the shack. He could hear the murmur of her voice through the thin walls, soothing the baby, shushing the younger ones when they whimpered in their sleep. By first light, she emerged with a tin cup of weak coffee and a piece of hard cornbread. "It's all I have," she said, handing them to him. "But you're welcome to it." Dakota accepted both, though he could see the hollow hunger in her own face. "The well," he said, nodding toward the padlocked cover. "How long?" "Week after Finn's funeral." Charlotte sat on the porch step, the baby, a girl maybe 8 months old, dozing against her shoulder. Sheriff Pike came with the banker, Mr. Humphrey Cole. Said Finn had taken a second loan, mortgaged the land and the water rights. Said if I couldn't pay, they'd have to secure the property. She laughed bitterly. "Property. It's a hole in the ground that my husband dug with his own hands. And you've been drinking from where?" "There's a creek about 2 miles east. The older boys fetch water in the mornings." She gestured toward the interior of the shack. "We boil it when we can afford firewood. Bathe every few days in a wash basin. Make do." Dakota sipped the coffee, it was mostly chicory, and studied the yard in the growing light. The fence rails were missing because someone had stolen them for firewood or spite. The vegetable patch had been trampled deliberately, boot prints clear in the dust. This wasn't just debt collection. This was cruelty designed to break a woman's will. "Tell me about Finn," he said. Charlotte's expression softened for a moment, grief and memory mixing. "He was a miner before we married. Good with his hands. Worked the claims up at Dead Man's Gulch until the veins played out. We moved here 5 years ago, tried to make a go of freighting. He had a wagon, and a team took contracts hauling supplies between Ember Ridge and Flint Rock. She paused, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Last winter was hard. We ran out of food in January. Finn heard there was a Cheyenne camp willing to trade. He went out with what little we had, some tools, a few blankets, and came back with meat and hides. Said he'd promised 3 horses come spring after the hauling season picked up. He kept his word about the trade, Dakota said. The meat and hides were good. Finn always kept his word. Charlotte's voice hardened. Which is why I know that promissory note is a lie. He wouldn't have mortgaged this place without telling me. He wouldn't have signed away our water. Before Dakota could respond, the sound of footsteps made them both turn. A man approached on foot carrying a worn leather medical bag. He was perhaps 40, graying at the temples with kind eyes and the stooped posture of someone who spent long hours bent over sick beds. He tipped his hat to Charlotte. Morning, Charlotte. Heard there was trouble yesterday. Morning, Ernest. Charlotte stood, relief visible in her shoulders. This is Dakota. He knew Finn. Dakota, this is Dr. Ernest Hale, Finn's younger brother. Ernest extended a hand, which Dakota shook. The doctor's grip was firm despite his slight build. Pleasure. Finn spoke highly of you. Said you dealt fair even when others wouldn't. He glanced toward the padlocked well. Still locked, I see. Still locked, Charlotte confirmed. And Pike says we've got until sundown today to clear out. Ernest frowned deeply. That's illegal without a proper court order. Judge Abernathy would never approve a seizure on a disputed debt. Abernathy's in Denver for the month, Charlotte said quietly. Pike knows it. Of course he does. Ernest set his bag down and pulled out a flask, offering it to Charlotte. Water from my cistern, for the baby. Charlotte took it gratefully, tears welling up before she blinked them back. Thank you. Ernest turned to Dakota. You planning to stick around? For now. Good. She needs allies. Ernest lowered his voice. I've been treating families on both sides of this mess, settlers and Cheyenne. I see things. Cole's been circulating money that doesn't feel right, too crisp, too perfect. I think there's more going on here than just land theft. Dakota's eyes narrowed. Bogus maker. Maybe. I'm no expert, but I've handled enough currency to know when something's off. Ernest glanced toward the road. If that's true, this is federal business. There's a Marshal, Nehemiah Brooks, who covers this territory. He's supposed to pass through Flint Rock in a few days. Then we need to get word to him, Charlotte said. Telegraph office is in Ember Ridge, Ernest replied. But the operator fellow named Davis, he's in Cole's pocket. Any message we send will get intercepted or changed. Before they could continue, a woman appeared on the road, middle-aged, dressed in a severe gray dress, with her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She carried a slate and a bundle of books under one arm. Her expression was stern, but not unkind. Charlotte Hale, I heard what happened, the woman called as she reached the yard. I've brought schoolwork for the children. They're not missing lessons because of Pike's bullying. Charlotte managed a weak smile. Thank you, Miss Dawson. Clara Dawson, the schoolteacher, nodded briskly. She set the books down on the porch and surveyed the situation with sharp eyes. I've been keeping a list, she said without preamble. Every well that's been locked in the past 6 months, every homestead that's been foreclosed, every family that's been forced to sell. 15 properties in all. Every single one ended up with Lorenzo Kane. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and handed it to Ernest. Dates, names, amounts. If someone wants to build a case, here's the pattern. Ernest unfolded the paper and whistled softly. This is good work, Clara. It's evidence, Clara corrected. And it needs to reach someone who'll act on it. She looked at Dakota appraisingly. You're the Cheyenne Finn traded with. I am. Then you know he was an honest man, which means this note Cole's waving around is fake. Clara's voice turned cold. Finn Hale didn't cheat anyone. He was murdered. The word hung in the air like a gunshot echo. Charlotte went pale. Ernest gripped her arm to steady her. Murdered, Charlotte whispered. Clara didn't soften. The mine collapse at Dead Man's Gulch wasn't an accident, Charlotte. I talked to one of the surveyors who inspected the site afterward. He said the support beams had been cut partway through, just enough to weaken them, not enough to be obvious. When the spring rains came and the water pressure built up, the whole shaft came down. Finn was the only one inside. Charlotte swayed. Dakota moved instinctively, catching her elbow before she could fall. Their eyes met for a brief moment, hers wide with shock and grief, his steady and certain. He didn't let go until she nodded that she was all right. Why? Charlotte's voice was barely audible. Why would anyone kill Finn? Because he saw something, Ernest said grimly. Or knew something. Something worth killing to keep quiet. Clara pulled another item from her pocket, a small notebook. I'm sending a telegram to Marshal Brooks today. From the land office in Sandbar, Davis won't see it. Brooks needs to know what's happening here before more people get hurt. The riders returned just as the sun touched the horizon, turning the sky the color of blood and copper. Dakota heard them before he saw them, the low thunder of hooves on hard-packed earth and the jingle of spurs and tack. He stood from where he'd been sharpening his knife on a whetstone and moved toward the road, positioning himself between the approaching men and the shack. Charlotte emerged from the doorway. The baby on her hip, Samuel and the other children clustered behind her. Her face was set in hard lines, fear buried beneath determination. She tied her hair back and put on a clean apron armor of a different kind, Dakota thought. A way of saying she would not be broken. Sheriff Pike rode at the head of the column, flanked by 5 men. 2 of them Dakota recognized from the previous day. The others were new hired guns by the look of them, with tied-down holsters and the cold eyes of men who killed for wages. Behind them came Humphrey Cole on his gray horse-leather satchel strapped to his saddle. He looked like a vulture riding to a feast. Pike reined in at the edge of the yard and leaned forward, resting both hands on his saddle horn. Well now, looks like you're still here, Mrs. Hale. This is my home, Charlotte said evenly. I'm not leaving. Afraid that's not your choice anymore. Pike pulled a folded paper from his coat and waved it lazily. Got a writ here from the county clerk. Says this property is forfeit due to unpaid debts. You've got 1 hour to gather your things and clear out. After that, we remove you by force. That writ's not legal, Charlotte shot back. Judge Abernathy hasn't reviewed the debt claim. You can't enforce a seizure without his approval. Cole urged his horse forward, his voice smooth and reasonable. Mrs. Hale, there's no need for drama. I'm prepared to offer you a fair settlement. Sign over the property deed and the water rights, and I'll forgive half of what's owed. You'll walk away with enough money to start fresh somewhere else. Charlotte looked at the paper, then at her children, then at Dakota. Something passed between them, a question asked and answered without words. She stepped forward, took the paper from Cole's hand, and tore it in half, then tore it again. The pieces fluttered to the ground like dying moths. I think that's my answer, she said. For a moment, no one moved. Then Pike's face twisted with rage. Search the house, he barked at his men. Take stock of everything. If she won't cooperate, we'll take it all. 2 men dismounted and started toward the shack. Samuel moved to block the door, small and defiant. One of the men, a heavy-set brute with a scarred face, shoved him aside. Samuel hit the ground hard, dust puffing up around him. Dakota moved before he could think. 3 strides closed the distance. He grabbed the man's shoulder, spun him around, and drove a fist into his gut, hard enough to double him over. The man staggered back, gasping, and fumbled for his pistol. "Don't," Dakota said softly. The man's eyes were wild with pain and fury. He cleared leather, bringing the gun up. Dakota's rope was already in his hand, a lariat with a weighted end. He snapped it forward in a tight arc, the loop catching the man's wrist and jerking him sideways. The gun went off bullet, kicking up dirt harmlessly. Dakota yanked hard, pulling the man off balance, then stepped in close. He felt the rifle butt coming from his blind side. Too late, it caught him across the ribs with a crack that drove the breath from his lungs. Dakota twisted, taking the blow on muscle rather than bone, and slammed an elbow into the second attacker's jaw. The brute dropped like a felled tree. Shouts erupted. Horses danced nervously. Pike swung the shotgun toward Dakota, hammers clicking back. "Stop!" Clara Dawson's voice rang out from the road. She stood beside a buckboard, hands raised, no weapon visible. "There's no court order, Sheriff. I checked with the clerk's office myself this morning. That writ you're holding is a forgery." Pike hesitated, his shotgun still leveled. "You calling me a liar, schoolteacher?" "I'm calling you a criminal," Clara said coldly. "And if you fire that weapon, there'll be a dozen witnesses willing to testify you murdered an unarmed man." Dakota glanced past her and saw it was true. A handful of townspeople had gathered on the road watching. Faithful Fred McKinnon sat on his wagon shotgun, resting openly across his knees. Dr. Ernest Hale stood beside him, medical bag in hand. Others lingered behind them, farmers and shopkeepers, silent but present. Cole's face went pale. He leaned toward Pike and hissed something Dakota couldn't hear. Pike's jaw worked furiously, but he lowered the shotgun a fraction. "This isn't over," Pike said, voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "You've got until dawn, Mrs. Hale. Then we come back with or without paper witnesses, be damned." He wheeled his horse and spurred it hard, the animal leaping into a gallop. The other riders followed, leaving the unconscious man sprawled in the dust. Night came with heat lightning. Dakota circled the property perimeter, checking angles and sight lines, ignoring the deep ache in his ribs where the rifle butt had connected. The bruise would be spectacular by morning, but nothing felt broken. Small mercies. Around midnight, movement near the corral made Dakota freeze. 2 shapes detached from the shadows, men moving low and quiet toward the shack. One carried something that gleamed in the starlight. A tin of coal oil. Arson, then. Burn them out and claim it was an accident. Dakota moved silently, using the darkness and his knowledge of the yard to his advantage. He'd strung his horse's lead rope low across the path between the corral and the house earlier, a precaution that now proved wise. The first man hit the tripwire at shin height and went down hard with a startled curse. The second turned confused just as Dakota closed the distance. The fight was brief and brutal. Dakota's knife flashed, once slicing through the second man's gun belt and sending his pistol clattering into the dust. A punch to the kidney dropped him to his knees. The first man scrambled up, swinging the coal oil tin like a club. It caught Dakota across the left side. His already bruised ribs and white-hot pain exploded through his chest. He tasted copper, felt something tear deep in the muscle. But pain was familiar. Pain was manageable. Dakota ducked, and the next swing stepped inside the man's guard and drove his knee up into the attacker's groin. The man folded with a choked gasp. Dakota caught him in a headlock, applied pressure until he went limp, and then used his rope to bind both attackers, hand and foot. Only when they were secured did Dakota allow himself to lean against the fence post, breathing through the pain. His hand came away wet when he touched his ribs. Not blood, thankfully, just sweat. But the ache had deepened into something sharper, more insistent. Charlotte appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand, eyes wide. "I heard fighting." "It's handled." Dakota straightened carefully. "2 men came to burn you out." "Are they alive? Tied up?" Dakota nodded toward the unconscious forms. "Check their pockets. Might be something useful." Charlotte approached cautiously, keeping the rifle trained on the bound men, even though they were clearly no threat. She knelt beside the first one and went through his coat with quick, efficient movements. Her hand emerged holding several crisp bills. "Money," she said, moving closer to the lantern light. Her brow furrowed. "But it feels wrong. Too smooth. And look at the printing, it's perfect. Too perfect." Dakota took one of the bills, rubbing it between his fingers. Ernest had been right. This wasn't genuine currency. This was bogus maker high-quality work, but fake nonetheless. "Wake him up," Dakota said, nodding to the nearest attacker. "I want to know where this came from." Charlotte fetched a bucket of wash water and dumped it over the man's head. He sputtered, awake eyes unfocused, then widening as he saw Dakota standing over him with a knife. "Where'd you get the money?" Dakota asked quietly. The man's eyes darted between Dakota and Charlotte, calculating. "I don't know what you're talking about." Dakota pressed the knife tip against the soft hollow of the man's throat, not cutting, just resting there with enough pressure to make breathing difficult. "Wrong answer." "Whiskey Tom?" The man gasped. "Whiskey Tom gives out the cash every week when we collect from Pike. That's all I know, I swear." Dakota eased the pressure slightly. "Who's Whiskey Tom?" "Thomas Farley, runs the card games at Coles Bank. Back room, has a safe full of that stuff." The man's words tumbled out in a panicked rush. "That's all I know. Please, I'm just hired help. I don't ask questions." Dakota held his gaze for a long moment, then withdrew the knife. "Get them out of here," he said to Charlotte. "Tie them to the fence where Pike can find them in the morning." They dragged the men to the far fence line, secured them, then returned to the shack. Inside, Ernest had arrived, summoned by Clara when she'd heard the commotion. The doctor examined the bills by lamplight, his expression growing grimmer with each one. "These are excellent fakes," he said finally. "Better than most I've seen. The paper's wrong, too refined, but the engraving work is professional. This isn't some backwoods outfit. Someone's running a sophisticated counterfeiting scheme." "And Finn found out?" Charlotte said quietly. "That's why they killed him." Ernest nodded slowly. "If he was hauling printing equipment and realized what it was, yes. They'd have silenced him to protect the outfit." "Clara sent that telegram to Marshall Brooks yesterday." Ernest continued. "From Sandbar, like she said. If he's in Flint Rock, he should receive it by morning. He'll come investigate." "Then we need to meet him," Charlotte said. Her voice was steady now, fear burned away by something harder. "Show him the evidence. Let federal law handle it." "Flint Rock's 30 miles, Ernest replied. "And Pike will have men watching the roads by morning." "Then we leave tonight," Charlotte said, "before he can organize a proper hunt." They moved quickly. Ernest rode back to arrange shelter for the children with Clara's sister. Faithful Fred appeared with 2 horses, older but sound, and volunteered to guide them through the back trails to Flint Rock. Charlotte packed a small bag, said goodbye to her children with fierce hugs and whispered promises, and climbed onto the horse Fred provided. Dakota watched her mount, noting the way she sat the saddle not gracefully, but competently. When she looked at him, there was something new in her expression. Partnership. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," Charlotte confirmed. They rode out as the last light died, heading northeast across open prairie. Behind them, Ember Ridge glowed faintly with lamplight. Ahead lay 30 miles of darkness and the slim hope of federal justice. They rode through the night with desperate urgency, the prairie stretching endlessly in every direction under a late rising moon. Fred set a punishing pace, knowing that every minute counted. Around midnight, Fred's older horse began to labor, its breathing harsh and uneven. The farmer patted its neck apologetically. "She's done her best. Can't push her much further." "How far to Flint Rock?" Charlotte asked from behind Dakota. She'd been riding pressed against his back for hours, her arms locked around his waist, their bodies moving together with the rhythm of the horse. The closeness was practical, two riders sharing a mount to give Fred's animal a lighter load. But Dakota was aware of her in a way that had nothing to do with survival. The warmth of her against his back, the way her breath stirred the hair at his neck. "Maybe 8 miles, Fred said. "But there's a problem. We'll have to cross Stone Creek before we reach town, and with the spring runoff, it'll be running high." They found a shallow ravine where a cluster of scrub oak provided minimal cover and dismounted to rest the horses. Charlotte slid off the horse and nearly fell, her legs numb from hours in the saddle. Dakota caught her by the elbow, steadying her. Their eyes met in the moonlight, hers exhausted, but determined, his concerned, but trusting. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded and released her, though his hand seemed reluctant to let go. "Rest. I'll keep watch." "You need rest too." "I'll rest when we reach the marshal." Charlotte studied him for a long moment, then moved to where Fred had already settled against a rock. Within minutes, her breathing evened out into sleep. Dakota positioned himself where he could watch the back trail and forced his body to stillness, despite the constant throb in his ribs. Dawn came too quickly, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber. They mounted again and rode toward the sound of rushing water. Stone Creek appeared through the morning mist, wider and faster than Dakota had hoped, swollen with snowmelt from the distant mountains. The current churned and roiled, carrying debris in its brown torrent. "Can we cross that?" Charlotte asked, voice tight with worry. Fred shook his head slowly. "Water's moving too fast. Horses'll get swept downstream." "There's a bridge," Dakota said, pointing south, where he could just make out the dark line of timbers spanning the creek. "Stone Bridge, about a mile down." They turned south, following the creek bank as the sun climbed higher. The bridge came into view, an old timber structure, weathered but solid, spanning the creek at its narrowest point. Dakota reined in at the approach, studying it carefully. "One at a time," he said. "Slow and steady." Fred went first, his horse's hooves making hollow sounds on the wood. He made it across without incident and turned to wave them forward. Charlotte started across next, moving carefully, murmuring encouragement to her horse when it balked at the creaking timbers. Dakota brought up the rear. He was halfway across when the rifle shot cracked across the water. The bullet splintered wood inches from his horse's hooves. The animal reared, nearly throwing him. Dakota fought to keep his seat as another shot followed this one, punching through the railing beside him. "Go!" he shouted to Charlotte. "Get to cover." He kicked his horse hard and the animal lunged forward. More shots followed, 3, 4, 5, in rapid succession. Dakota felt one tug at his sleeve. Then he was across, wheeling toward the willows, where Charlotte and Fred had taken shelter. Dakota dismounted in a controlled fall, bringing his rifle up as he hit the ground. His ribs screamed protest, but he ignored it. Through the willows, he could see riders on the far bank, 4 of them, maybe 50 yards downstream. Pike's men. But worse was coming from the north. More riders, 6 of them led by a man on a buckskin gelding. Lorenzo Kane, barrel-chested, graying, with the kind of presence that came from decades of unchallenged power. "Damn," Fred breathed. "They've got us boxed." Charlotte's hand found Dakota's arm, gripping tight. He covered her fingers briefly with his own, a gesture of reassurance, then pulled away and checked his rifle. 5 rounds. Against 10 men. Kane urged his horse forward, stopping about 30 yards away. "Mrs. Hale, I'm disappointed. This didn't have to get ugly." Charlotte stood slowly, Dakota moving with her, positioning himself slightly in front. "You murdered my husband," she called back. "I'd say it was already ugly." "Finn's death was an accident," Kane started. "Lies," Charlotte interrupted. "You had the mine rigged to collapse. You killed him because he found out about your counterfeiting outfit." For just a moment, Kane's mask slipped. Surprise flickered across his face. "That's a serious accusation. One you can't prove." "The bills we found are proof," Charlotte said. "The equipment Finn was hauling is proof. And once Marshal Brooks hears what we know, you'll hang." Kane's smile was thin and dangerous. "The Marshal's not going to." The sound of a single horse approaching at full gallop cut him off. A rider burst through the trees, his mount lathered with sweat, and Dakota saw the silver star pinned to his vest, a U.S. Marshal's badge. Marshal Nehemiah Brooks reined in hard between Kane's line and the willows. He was perhaps 50 lean and weathered, with a gray mustache and eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Kane," Brooks said mildly. "Interesting place for a gathering." Kane's jaw tightened. "Marshal, this is county business." "Counterfeiting is federal business," Brooks replied. He looked at Charlotte. "Mrs. Hale, I presume I received Miss Dawson's telegram. You're the one who has evidence." Charlotte stepped forward, hope flooding her features. "Yes, Marshal. We have bogus maker bills found on one of Pike's men. And there's printing equipment hidden at Dead Man's Gulch. My husband discovered it and was killed to keep him quiet." Brooks listened carefully, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "Serious charges. You have this evidence with you." Fred pulled the leather pouch from his coat and held it up. "Right here, Marshal." Brooks dismounted and walked over. He examined the bills with what looked like practiced care, turning them over in his hands, holding them up to the light. After a long moment, he looked up at Charlotte. "These are quality fakes," he said. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "Where did you say the printing equipment is?" "Dead Man's Gulch," Dakota said. "Hidden in the old mine shaft." "I see." Brooks folded the bills carefully and tucked them into his coat pocket. Then, in a movement so smooth it seemed almost casual, he drew his pistol and aimed it directly at Charlotte's chest. "That's unfortunate." The world seemed to stop. Dakota's hand flew to his rifle, but Brooks shifted his aim with professional speed. "Don't. I'm faster, and you know it." "What?" Charlotte's voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing?" Brooks' expression didn't change. It remained calm, almost regretful. "My job, Mrs. Hale. Protecting my investment. You see that counterfeiting outfit you're so eager to expose? I've been running it for the past 3 years. Cole and Pike and Kane, they're just employees. Overseers, if you will." Fred made a choked sound. "You're the one behind it." "I am." Brooks kept his pistol trained on Charlotte, but his eyes flicked to Kane and Pike's men on the far bank. "Gentlemen, if you'd be so kind as to cross the bridge and secure our witnesses here, I'd be much obliged." Kane's face split into a grin, ugly and triumphant. "Yes, Sir Marshal." Dakota's mind raced, calculating distances, angles, possibilities. Brooks was right, he was faster. Any move Dakota made would get Charlotte killed. But doing nothing would get them all killed anyway. "Clara sent you that telegram," Charlotte said, her voice shaking. She was trying to help. "And she did help," Brooks replied. "She helped me know exactly where you'd be and when. Made it much easier to arrange this little meeting." He glanced at Kane. "Hurry up. We don't have all day." Pike's men began crossing the bridge boots, thudding on the planks. Kane's riders moved forward from the north. The trap was closing. Fred's hand moved toward the pistol at his belt, a slow, subtle motion. Brooks saw it anyway. "Don't," the marshal said. Fred froze. Brooks sighed almost sadly. "I'm sorry, Mr. McKinnon. Truly, you seem like a decent fellow, but I can't have witnesses." The shot was deafening in the morning stillness. Fred jerked backward, a red bloom spreading across his chest. He fell, hitting the ground with a heavy thud, his eyes wide and shocked. Charlotte screamed. Dakota moved on instinct, grabbing her and pulling her behind his horse as Brooks swung the pistol toward them. The second shot went wide, punching into the willow trunk. Dakota shoved Charlotte toward the creek bank. "Run," he shouted. "Into the water. But Fred, he's gone, move." They plunged into the creek, the icy water hitting like a fist. The current grabbed immediately, trying to pull them downstream. Dakota kept one hand locked on Charlotte's arm, pulling her toward the far bank, even as bullets whined overhead. His ribs were on fire, each breath a knife of pain. But he didn't stop. Behind them, Brooks was shouting orders. Horses splashed into the water. More gunfire. They reached the far bank and scrambled up the muddy slope, gasping and shaking. Dakota looked back and saw Fred's body lying motionless by the willows, saw Brooks mounting his horse with that same calm, professional efficiency. "This way," Dakota said, pulling Charlotte into the brush. "We need distance." They ran. For the next 2 hours, they moved through the wilderness, like hunted animals. Dakota used every trick he knew, crossing streams to break their scent trail, doubling back to confuse pursuers, using rock outcroppings to hide their tracks. Charlotte kept pace, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her dress torn and muddy, but she didn't slow down, didn't complain. Finally, as the sun climbed toward noon, Dakota found what he was looking for, a shallow cave, barely more than an overhang, hidden behind a tangle of scrub oak. They crawled inside and collapsed, hearts pounding, lungs burning. "Fred," Charlotte whispered after a moment. Tears streaked the dirt on her face. "He was just trying to help. He didn't deserve. No one deserves what Brooks is doing," Dakota said quietly. "But Fred died buying us time. We can't waste it." Charlotte wiped her eyes roughly. "What do we do now? Brooks is a U.S. Marshal. Who do we report him to? Who's going to believe us?" Dakota was silent for a long moment, thinking. "Ernest," he said finally. "And Clara. They know we went to meet Brooks. When we don't come back, they'll know something went wrong. But they don't know Brooks is corrupt. They will when Brooks comes for them next." Dakota shifted, wincing as his ribs protested. "Brooks can't leave witnesses. He'll go after anyone who knows about the counterfeiting. That means Ernest, Clara, and probably your children." Charlotte's face went white. "We have to warn them." "We will. But first, we need to get to Dead Man's Gulch." "Why the printing equipment?" "Is the only physical evidence that can prove Brooks is behind this." Dakota finished. "Right now, it's his word against ours. A U.S. Marshal versus a widow and a Cheyenne. Who do you think people will believe?" Charlotte closed her eyes, understanding the brutal truth of it. "But if we destroy the equipment, we don't destroy it. We secure it. Protect it until we can get it to someone higher up the federal chain, someone Brooks doesn't control. Dakota leaned his head back against the rock. It's the only way. You're hurt, Charlotte said, noticing for the first time how he was holding his left side, how his breathing was shallow and careful. How badly? Ribs, bruised, maybe cracked. From the fight last night. Dakota managed a thin smile. I've had worse. Charlotte moved closer, her hands gentle, as she lifted his shirt to examine the injury. The entire left side of his torso was one massive bruise, purple and black, and mottled with yellow at the edges. She sucked in a breath. That needs proper care. Wrapping at least. Later. Dakota pulled his shirt back down. Right now, we need to figure out how to get to Dead Man's Gulch without Brooks catching us. They sat in silence for a moment, both thinking. Finally, Charlotte spoke. Finn used to talk about the gulch, about how dangerous the mine was. He said the support beams were rotting, that the whole thing was ready to collapse at any moment. She looked at Dakota. He said one good shock and explosion maybe would bring the whole mountain down. Dakota met her eyes, understanding dawning. If we could trap Brooks and his men inside, we'd bury the evidence, yes, but we'd also bury them. And without Brooks alive to contradict us, people might believe our story. Charlotte's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. I never thought I'd be planning to kill people. But after what he did to Fred, it's not murder if it's justice, Dakota said quietly. And Brooks has earned what's coming. They waited in the cave until dusk, giving their exhausted bodies a few hours of rest. Dakota dozed fitfully, waking every few minutes to check their surroundings. Charlotte sat with her back against the rock wall, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring out at the forest with eyes that had seen too much. As the sun began to set, Dakota stirred. Time to move. They emerged from the cave, cautiously scanning for any sign of pursuit. The forest was quiet, except for bird song and the rustle of wind through leaves. They moved northeast toward Dead Man's Gulch, staying off the main trails and using the gathering darkness for cover. Around midnight, they saw the first torches in the distance. Brooks's men spread out in a search pattern, moving methodically through the hills. Dakota and Charlotte went to ground, pressing themselves flat against the earth as riders passed within 50 yards of their position. When the torches moved on, they continued more carefully now. The gulch was close. Dakota could smell the damp earth and mineral scent of the old mining operations. They reached the edge of the ravine just before dawn. Below in the narrow valley sat the entrance to the mine boards, pried loose just as they'd been told. And outside, standing guard, were two of Pike's men. We can't fight them, Charlotte whispered. Not directly. No, Dakota agreed. He studied the terrain, noting the steep slopes on either side of the ravine, the loose rock and unstable ground. But we don't need to. He pointed to a spot about 100 yards upstream where recent rains had created a small landslide. Rocks and earth had piled up against a natural dam formed by fallen trees. If we can break that dam, send all that debris downhill, it'll hit the mine entrance, Charlotte finished. Block it, trap anyone inside. And if we're lucky, it'll make enough noise to draw Brooks and his men to investigate. Dakota looked at her. Can you fire a rifle? Finn taught me. I'm not good, but I can hit what I aim at if it's close enough. Then here's what we do. They spent the next hour positioning themselves. Dakota moved to the natural dam, checking the stability, finding the key points, where a few well-placed blows could start the whole mass sliding. Charlotte took up a position on the opposite slope rifle, ready with clear sight lines to the mine entrance. As the sun rose, painting the gulch in shades of amber and rose, they saw what they'd been waiting for: Brooks, riding at the head of a column of men, pike cane, and at least a dozen hired guns. They rode directly to the mine entrance. Brooks dismounted and gestured to the guards. "Anyone been here?" "No, Sir Marshal. Quiet all night." "Good. Pike cane, take your men inside. Start dismantling the printing equipment. Load everything onto the wagons. We're moving the outfit to Wyoming territory. Too hot here now." Kane frowned. "What about the widow and the savage?" "We'll find them eventually," Brooks said calmly. "But right now, securing this equipment is the priority. Without it, they have no proof. It's their word against mine." He smiled coldly. "And I'm a U.S. Marshal. Who's going to believe them?" The men filed into the mine, carrying lanterns and tools. Brooks stayed outside for a moment, scanning the surrounding hills with the practiced eye of a manhunter. Then he too entered the shaft, disappearing into the darkness. Dakota caught Charlotte's eye across the ravine. She nodded, raising the rifle. He turned to the dam, selected his spot, and began to work. The first few rocks came free easily, then larger ones. The entire structure groaned, shifting. Dakota grabbed a fallen branch and used it as a lever, prying at the key support timber. His ribs shrieked in protest, but he ignored them, throwing his full weight against the branch. With a crack like a gunshot, the timber snapped. The dam burst. Tons of rock and earth and debris roared down the slope like an avalanche. Trees snapped. Boulders bounded 20 feet in the air. The noise was deafening. Charlotte fired her rifle once, twice, 3 times, aiming not at people but at the rock face above the mine entrance. Her shots triggered smaller slides, adding to the chaos. The landslide hit the mine entrance with the force of a locomotive. Timbers shattered. The entire opening collapsed in a cloud of dust and flying debris. Men inside screamed the sound, cutting off abruptly as tons of rock sealed them in. Dakota slid down the slope, half running, half falling, racing to reach Charlotte. She emerged from her position at the same time, and they met at the bottom of the ravine, staring at what they'd done. The mine entrance was completely buried. 20 feet of rock and earth where the opening had been. No way in, no way out. "Is it enough?" Charlotte asked, her voice shaking. "Will it hold?" Before Dakota could answer, the ground beneath them shuddered. A deep rumbling came from underground, and the sound of the entire mine structure, collapsing support beams, giving way, chambers caving in, one after another, in a chain reaction. The rumbling went on for almost a minute. Then silence. Charlotte sank to her knees in the dust, her hands over her mouth. "They're dead, all of them. Brooks, Pike, Kane. All of them." Dakota crouched beside her, his own hands shaking with reaction and exhaustion. "They would have killed us. Killed Ernest and Clara and your children. This was the only way." "I know." Charlotte looked up at him, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "I know. But that doesn't make it easier." They stayed there as the sun climbed higher, too exhausted and emotionally drained to move. Eventually, Charlotte spoke again. "What happens now without Brooks to contradict us? Will anyone believe our story?" "Ernest and Clara will," Dakota said. "And they can testify to what they know. The bogus maker bills we gave them, the list Clara made Fred's death." He paused. "It won't be easy, but it's possible. And if people don't believe us..." Dakota was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, offering his hand to help her up. "Then we disappear. Take your children and go somewhere Brooks's reach doesn't extend. Start over." Charlotte took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Their eyes met and held. "Together?" she asked quietly. "If you'll have me." Charlotte's answer was to step closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her, despite the morning chill. "I'll have you," she whispered. Then she kissed him a kiss that tasted of dust and tears and desperation and hope all mixed together. Dakota wrapped his arms around her, carefully mindful of his injured ribs, and held her as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had turned to chaos. When they finally pulled apart, the sun was fully up, bathing the gulch in golden light. And in the distance, they could hear the sound of horses approaching, many horses moving fast. For a moment, Dakota tensed, reaching for his rifle. Then he saw the riders crest the ridge and recognized the lead horse, Clara Dawson's sturdy plow mare. The schoolteacher rode at the head of a group of 20 or more people, farmers, shopkeepers, even a few of the miners from Ember Ridge. Ernest was there, his medical bag strapped to his saddle. Behind them came wagons carrying Charlotte's children, all 6 of them, safe and wide-eyed. Clara reined in and looked down at Dakota and Charlotte with her sharp, assessing gaze. Then she looked at the collapsed mine entrance. "I take it Marshal Brooks won't be testifying at any trials," she said dryly. "No, ma'am," Dakota replied. "He won't." Clara nodded slowly. "Good. The son of a—" She caught herself glancing at the children in the wagons. "The scoundrel shot Fred McKinnon in cold blood. Ernest here saw the whole thing from a distance. He rode back to tell us what happened." Ernest dismounted, moving to examine Dakota's ribs despite his protests. "Fred lived long enough to tell me everything," the doctor said quietly. "About Brooks drawing on you, about how he admitted to running the counterfeiting outfit." His hands were gentle but thorough as he probed the injury. 2 cracked ribs, maybe 3. You need rest and proper binding. "We need to report this," Charlotte said, "to someone above Brooks in the federal chain." "Already done," Clara replied. She pulled a telegram from her pocket. "Soon as Ernest told us what happened, I sent word to the territorial governor in Denver. He's sending investigators and a new marshal, one who works directly for the Attorney General's office." She looked at the mine again. "I expect they'll want to excavate that eventually. Recover the bodies, the evidence." "Let them," Charlotte said. Her voice was hard. "Let them dig up every piece of that printing equipment. Let them see what Brooks was really doing." Over the next 3 weeks, Ember Ridge was flooded with federal investigators. They dug out the mine entrance, a process that took days, and recovered the bodies of Brooks, Pike, Kane, and their men. They also recovered the printing press, the engraving plates, and enough bogus maker currency to make the case ironclad. Ernest and Clara testified. The townspeople who'd witnessed Fred's shooting testified. Even Davis, the telegraph operator, turned state's evidence in exchange for leniency, admitting that Brooks had been paying him to intercept messages for years. The new marshal, a serious young man named Garrett, declared Charlotte's land seizure illegal and void. The forged promissory note was entered into evidence as part of Brooks's criminal conspiracy. The padlock was removed from the well, and clean water flowed once more. But the victory felt hollow. Fred McKinnon was dead, buried in the town cemetery with full honors. Finn Hale's name was cleared posthumously, but Charlotte would never get him back, and the community, while grateful for justice, remained wary, especially of Dakota. He'd stayed through the investigation, testifying when asked, helping Charlotte rebuild the homestead's damaged structures. But he felt the weight of stares whenever he rode into town. Heard the whispers that followed him down the street. Saw the way mothers pulled their children closer when he passed. It didn't matter that he'd helped stop Brooks. Didn't matter that he'd fought to protect Charlotte and her children. To many of the settlers, he would always be the outsider, the savage, the one who didn't belong. Charlotte saw it too, and it made her furious. "They should be grateful," she said one evening as they sat on the rebuilt porch watching the sunset. "You saved lives, stopped a criminal conspiracy, and they treat you like what I am. Dakota finished quietly. An outsider. It's not their fault, Charlotte. It's just how things are. It's wrong. Many things are wrong. That doesn't mean they'll change. Dakota looked at her at the way the setting sun turned her hair to gold, at the stubborn set of her jaw that he'd come to know so well. I won't lie to you. If I stay here, this is what life will be. Always on the edge of the community. Never fully accepted. Your children will face questions. Judgment. Let them question, Charlotte said fiercely. Let them judge. I don't care what they think. You should care. Your children have to live here. They have to grow up here. Dakota reached out, taking her hand in his. I won't be the reason they're outcast. Charlotte turned to face him fully, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Then what are you saying that you're leaving? I'm saying. Dakota paused, choosing his words carefully. I'm saying that if I stay, it has to be for the right reasons. Not because I owe you, not because I feel obligated, but because we both choose it, knowing what it will cost. And what will it cost? Everything, Dakota said honestly. The community's acceptance, the children's easy place in society, the comfortable life you could have if you remarried someone more suitable. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. Then she laughed, a short, sharp sound. Comfortable. Do you think I want comfortable, Dakota? I've spent the past 3 months fighting for my life, for my children's lives, for basic human dignity. I've been threatened, hunted, nearly murdered by a U.S. Marshal. I brought down a mountain on 24 men and watched them die. She squeezed his hand hard. I don't want comfortable. I want honest. I want real. I want someone who sees me as more than a burden or a transaction or a stepping stone to land ownership. And I want someone who won't leave when things get hard. Someone who'll stand with me when the whole town is whispering. Someone who'll help me raise 6 children who aren't his blood, but could be his family. She met his eyes unflinching. Can you be that person? Dakota looked at her, this woman who'd been broken down and built herself back up stronger, who'd lost everything and fought to reclaim it, who'd looked death in the face and spit in its eye. Yes, he said simply. I can. Then stay. I will. But not in town. Not trying to fit into a world that doesn't want us. Dakota gestured toward the land around them, the rolling prairie, the distant hills, the vast sky. Here. We build our life here. Your children, my knowledge of the land. Your strength, my skills. We make this place into something that's ours. Something no one can take away. Charlotte nodded slowly. Our own world. Our own world. Dakota agreed. They were married a week later, not in the church, which had made it clear that a mixed marriage would not be welcomed, but on the land itself. Ernest officiated using a book of common prayer. Clara stood as witness. The 6 children formed a semicircle, solemn and uncertain, but present. There was no reception. No guests beyond those few friends. No celebration in town. Just a simple exchange of vows under the prairie sky with the wind as their music and the sunset as their blessing. Afterward, Samuel, the oldest boy, approached Dakota hesitantly. Should we call you Pa now? Dakota crouched down to the boy's level. You can call me Dakota, or you can call me Pa, or you can call me whatever feels right. But I promise you this, I will protect you. I will teach you what I know. And I will be here. That's all that matters. Samuel thought about this for a long moment and then nodded. Pa, then, if that's all right. Dakota's throat tightened. It's more than all right. The years that followed were not easy. The land was harsh, the weather unforgiving, and the isolation from town society was real and sometimes painful. But they built something together, Dakota and Charlotte and the 6 children who became theirs in all the ways that mattered. Dakota taught the boys to track and hunt and read the weather. He taught the girls too, to their delight, refusing to accept that certain knowledge should be limited by gender. Charlotte taught all of them to read and write and calculate using the books Clara quietly donated to their cause. Together, they taught the children about 2 worlds, the Cheyenne way of reading the land and respecting its rhythms, and the settler way of planting and harvesting and building for the future. The children grew up straddling both cultures, belonging fully to neither, but creating something new in the space between. The homestead prospered not through wealth, but through self-sufficiency. They raised cattle and chickens grew wheat, and vegetables traded with a few neighbors who would deal with them fairly. It wasn't the life Charlotte might have imagined as a young woman, but it was theirs. Years later, when Samuel was grown and about to leave to seek his fortune in Denver, he asked his mother a question that had been weighing on him. "Do you ever regret it, marrying Dakota? The way things turned out?" Charlotte looked at her son, tall, now strong, with his father's dark hair and her green eyes. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single day." "But the town doesn't matter," Charlotte interrupted. "What matters is that I built a life with someone I respect, someone I trust, someone who chose to stay when he could have left." She smiled. "Your father Finn was a good man. But Dakota is my partner, my equal. We made this life together, Samuel. Every hard choice, every sacrifice, every victory. Together." "You love him?" Samuel said. It wasn't quite a question. "I do," Charlotte confirmed. "Not the way girls dream about in storybooks, but the way real people love, tested and earned and built one day at a time." She touched her son's face gently. "That's the kind of love that lasts." On a warm summer evening, when they were both graying at the temples and their hands showed the wear of decades of hard work, Dakota and Charlotte sat on their porch, rebuilt for the 3rd time after a particularly vicious storm, and watched the sunset paint the prairie in shades of copper and gold. "Do you remember," Charlotte said quietly, "the first time you rode up to this place, what you thought when you saw it?" "I thought it was falling apart," Dakota replied honestly. "I thought I'd collect my horses and leave. Find my debt paid somewhere else." "And now?" Dakota looked at the land around them, the sturdy barn they'd built together, the garden producing its summer bounty, the well flowing clean and free, the children's children playing in the yard. "Now I think it's the richest place I've ever seen." Charlotte reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his with the ease of long practice. "We paid a heavy price for this." "We did," Dakota agreed. "Fred, Finn, the easy acceptance we'll never have. The comfortable life we gave up. Was it worth it?" Dakota turned to look at her, this woman who'd faced down corrupt lawmen and federal marshals, who'd helped him bring down a mountain on their enemies, who'd chosen him when the whole world said she shouldn't. "Every day," he said. "Every single day." Charlotte smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder. And as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear, they sat together in comfortable silence. 2 souls who'd found each other in the worst of circumstances and built something beautiful from the wreckage. The debt Finn had owed was long since paid. But what remained, what would always remain, was the choice they'd made to build a life together on their own terms, in their own world. A world where honor mattered more than acceptance, where love was earned rather than assumed, where family was defined not by blood or law, but by the commitment to stand together when everything else fell apart. And in the end, that was worth more than all the horses in the territory.